Welcome. My name is Matt Strain. I've got a company called The Prompt, and today we're here to look at AI specifically applied to boards and how boards can use it for board development and board recruitment. I also want to thank the crew from Praxonomy and Board Logic. We've really enjoyed working together to think about how AI and the various capabilities can add to the functionality that Board Logic is bringing to its customers. So thank you for that. Now, on with the show. Sadly, you're going to miss the excitement of the in-person meeting, but we'll do our best. So again, I mentioned we're doing this in partnership with Praxonomy. So many thanks to Alan, to Doug, and to the rest of the team. We're going to go through probably for about 20 to 25 minutes. Sadly, what you're going to miss are the in-person exercises, which seriously, I think are some of the most important things when you're starting to learn about AI and kind of jump into this is how do other people react? What are they thinking? So I would strongly encourage you to find a way to bounce these ideas off other people. This is a re-recording of a live session, so you're going to miss the breakout rooms, and the Q&A that took place is not going to be recorded. So for many of you, sort of the whole question of AI may feel like a tsunami. There is so much information and so much hype and so much excitement and also concern which is coming at us. But let me ground it in just a couple facts. So a lot of these stats are taken from a Deloitte study that they did recently, and recently this is being recorded in December of 2024. So 45% of boards, and this is a combination of board members and CEOs, have said that AI is not yet even been put on their board agenda. 50% feel the pace of AI adoption needs to accelerate, and only 3% believe their organizations are ready for broader AI deployment. So what I'm seeing, and we spend a lot of time talking with companies around the world, is basically as board members and as executives, we're not ready for what is about to hit us. So the idea today is to give you a glimpse into some ways that you can start using AI today. And one of the suggestions that we have is really to start with small steps so you get familiar with it and you don't get overwhelmed. And this is the Deloitte study that I referred to. It is one of the few studies that looks specifically at AI as it is applied to boards of directors. It's got some really, really good stats in there. So obviously, if you're on this call, you're leaning in, you're AI curious, but I find some of these stats in a group like Deloitte can give you a lot of sort of fodder when you're talking to other people who you're working with who may be a little more skeptical about AI. So who are we? So my name is Matt Strain. As I said, I'm the founder and principal of a company called The Prompt. My partner, Doug, was in the live session that we did. He's not going to be on this recording. So my background is I've got 3 decades in tech, started off with Apple, Alta Vista, one of the early search companies, not the one that ended up winning, and then left Adobe a couple of years ago after about 17 years. While I was there, my last role was running strategy and innovation for the Technology Research Lab. So in that, I got a lot of experience working in and around what was happening with generative AI. And since then, about 2.5 years ago, just as ChatGPT was starting to take off, I started up a consultancy to help take AI and make it actionable and accessible for what I call real people. And these are people who aren't technologists, who aren't engineers, who aren't scientists, but busy business people who have operational roles and are trying to figure out how to integrate it in a real life environment. So Doug, my partner, and we met 30 years ago at Adobe. He's had a long run as an educator, facilitator, general techie. He's in the game and game design space. He's done experiential learning programs for the US government, for Ford Foundation, for Cisco, for a whole range of different companies. And today, what we do with The Prompt is, as I mentioned, we basically help leaders and their teams accelerate AI adoption and do it in a way that they're focused on the people issues, right? So the technology is important and the technology is changing super quickly, but the hardest part of this is like getting people to understand how to use it, how to start using it, how not to do things that are going to freak them out or make them feel like they're going to lose their job, but to put them in a situation where they've got a sense of agency and control over what's happening. And we do this in 3 ways. One is we have a strategic component to what we do trainings and workshops, and we have a program or implementation support side. For the strategy side, one of the first things we'll do is come in and do an assessment that gives us a baseline and a diagnostic for things around strategy, culture, tech readiness. Is there a governance program in place? And we'll combine that with traditional SWOT analysis to help people understand how they can actually start moving forward. Second thing is workshops. What we're doing today is like a mini version of one of the workshops. One of the ones that's super fun is the AI fundamentals, basically the essentials of getting started with AI, developing an AI mindset. We do custom work for groups like HR professionals, investment professionals, and then we also have a general advanced prompting workshop that we'll do. Third thing is we'll put together sort of a list of the things that companies need to do to get started. These generally fall into AI training and education programs, establishing an AI council, developing usage guidelines, building up internal champions within an organization, and lastly, defining use cases. So not trying to do everything, but picking those few things that companies and people can do that are going to have the biggest impact. So getting to know you. So this is really based on the responses we had to this, which was a general audience of Praxonomy customers and partners. So what was interesting and not surprising, actually, is about 70% of people describe their AI usage as irregular or never using it. And this isn't surprising. This is what we're seeing. So despite all the hype and the discussion around AI, I'm finding most people have a perception and an awareness of what it is. But in terms of hands-on usage, it's half to 70% of the people who haven't used it isn't really that surprising. In this case, we had a small number of people that said they used it throughout the day. Some people used it weekly. And, the large majority of people were really just getting started with AI. So if you feel like you're behind, you're not, right? The general discussion is ahead of the actual usage. So today's session, we're going to do just enough of AI 101 so you understand the context for what we're talking about in AI with boards. So I'll try to make this as concise as I can so you get enough information to kind of understand what's happening. And the idea is not that there's a precise way of doing it. It's more a mindset change when you're starting to work with AI. So let me hop into that. Oh, last thing is some people like stats. So two other stats that I think are useful. And if you're here and on this call, you're probably interested anyways. These are stats that you might be able to use when you go back and talk to your other board members or colleagues. First one, 70% of boards struggle to find candidates with both general business knowledge and specific relevant skills. And the second one, which, if you're on this call, is probably familiar to you, is it can take up to 24 months for boards to find the ideal board candidate. So these two things, to me, argue for being open to a faster, quicker, more comprehensive way of getting to, action, or in this case of this workshop, finding a new board member. Okay, so let's hop into AI 101. So first thing you need to be thinking about is, despite what they may look like, AI and search are really very different. So part of what happened though, which is what causes this confusion, is when ChatGPT came out, it looked an awful lot like search. And in fact, GPT had been around for many years, but it had a really difficult, challenging interface. So the smart thing they did was to simplify the interface. What this meant is because it looks similar, people would take the same search query and plug it in to AI, which was interesting and amusing and worked for a haiku for your dog, but didn't really get us to the level of sophistication that we wanted. So in thinking about the difference, I'm going to go through a couple different ways to kind of compare and contrast the two. First one is, if you think about search, right, is more like the traditional card catalog. And I do realize that many of you on the call may not have ever actually interacted with a card catalog, but imagine if you would. So the card catalog, you're looking for a book in the library, you pull it out, it tells you what shelf and where it is, and it points you on where to go. AI, on the other hand, is more like a friend or an advisor or an intern who you ask him or her a question, and they're going to come back and tell you what they think. right? They may not have a specific piece of paper they hand you, and they probably won't, but they would say, oh, here's what I think. So that's really the way to think about the two. And you interact with the two very differently, right? In the card catalog, if you misspell an author's name, you're not going to find it. But with an intern, if you say, I think it was somebody whose name was Goldberg or Goldblum, or they did this thing with the, and that person will be like, all right, I think I know what you're saying. So let me give you a couple other examples to think about. All right, query for search in a conversation. So that chat part of ChatGPT is absolutely critical. So like in a conversation, if I stumble or stammer or get a word slightly wrong, you're going to understand what I'm trying to say, and you'll be like, got it, and then you can go and run with it. With a query, not so much. Search is more like sending you links, and AI would deliver insights. Search is information retrieval. AI is more interactivity and interaction. Search is more like an encyclopedia. Every day you go and you pull that encyclopedia off the shelf, you're going to get the exact same response for that thing you're looking up. With AI, it's really, I use Socratic Mentor because it is more like that. It would give you some insights. It would give you a response. It would be slightly different each time and each day. And it would also lead you to think more about the topic. So one of the things that's interesting with most of the search or most of the, there I did it, most of the AI tools is it'll come back and it'll say, would you like more information about this? Or should we explore this other topic? And it gets you thinking in a way to open you up and explore things that you might not have ordinarily thought of. And lastly, for some people, the orchestra versus jazz comparison works. In orchestra, things are very tightly scripted. It's very regimented. It's more like structured and engineering-like. And on the jazz side, you've got much more interaction, much more play. You know, somebody might go off in a slightly different direction and come back. And it really is that interplay between the two where things get magical. So I hope that helps. So couple comments on prompting. So a friend of mine was talking, very successful female executives. She was saying, I don't even know where to put the words in this thing. So first, let's focus on the words that you would put into the prompt, and then I'll show you where to put them. So first one, tell it what role you want it to play. Do you want it to be a doctor, a business advisor, an academic, an editor? So you need to say, I want you to play this role. And then you need to give it the context in the background. So tell it where you're coming from, what problem you're trying to solve, what the history is, what other things you've tried. And the more context you can give it, the better off you're going to be. These models have grown at such a rate that the amount of context you can put in can be like a book. It can be a briefing document. It can be, endless text. So we're getting to the point where what they're calling the context window is essentially going to become infinite. So you'll be able to put in as much context as you want. Third is to specify the output in the format. Do you want a set of 5 talking points? Do you want a briefing document? Do you want a social media post for Instagram? Do you want an academic report or a book outline, right? So again, as if you're talking to an intern or to an advisor, you need to tell it what it is that you're looking for and what you expect from them. And you also need to tell it the style and tone of the output. Again, is it like funny? Is it casual? Is it lighthearted? Or is it formal, academic? So you can direct the tone to and the style for whatever you want. If you have a favorite, and I'll do this sometimes, like with the New York Times. If I'm editing something, I'll say, edit this in the style of the New York Times. Or if it's something more technology focused, I might say, review this, in the tone of the MIT Technology Review, right? Or if I'm having fun on the weekend, create this in the style and tone of The Onion, the parody and comedy site. And lastly, define the audience. So are you trying to create something for experienced board of directors, for a 6-year-old who you're trying to put to bed, for someone who's a second language, for whom English is a second language? So you can, think about your audience, and it will take the output and craft it specifically for that. Now, 2 of the things that I find really helpful, and this is sort of like prompting 201. If at the end of this exercise, you come back and you ask it, what have I missed or how can I improve? You will get like some really, really interesting insights. So no matter what you're doing, if you just ask it those two questions at the end, like what could I have done better? And again, the point is it doesn't need to be those exact words, but you can go back and have it reflect on itself and your interaction with it. And the question of like, where do I put these words? This is what ChatGPT 4 looks like. So it asks you, what can I help with? And you would put the words or your prompt in here. And if you look at the bottom, it has now evolved a little bit. So you can click on any of those. If you want advice, it'll lead you down that path. If you want to write something, it can help you write it. So again, this is what the interface looks like. Very simple, not intimidating, easy to get started with. And I believe they've recently introduced just a free version. If you go to ChatGPT, you just come up with this. You don't even need to create an account. Okay, that was a lot. I wish we could pause and have some actual Q&A, but that's not going to happen. So let's move on to AI and board development. So to jump right in, what I started with was breaking down the board recruitment process. So the scenario is, if you're looking to hire a new board member, what would that look like and how would you go about it? So I broke this down in about 10 different steps. You may have more, you may have fewer, but let me walk through what those are. Job description for the new board member, recruitment strategy. And again, these are two really different things, right? So one is a very specific job description, the other is a strategy. And again, I wouldn't worry so much about the order because these could be in two different orders, probably should be. List of potential candidates, personalized introductions, behavioral interview questions, evaluation rubric for the interviews, conduct the interviews, drafting an offer letter, onboarding plan, and then a review of what you just went through. All of these steps, there's a role that AI can play. And you can do this discreetly, right? You could use AI for one step and not the other. But the thing to think about is, in all these, could you do it faster or more completely, or explore some more things if you're using AI as a thought partner for this? At this point, AI is not going to replace any of these, right? I would look at AI as an assistant. In the future, you will see AI potentially replacing some of these, and that's where the phrase human in the loop comes in. So what we'll see at some point in the future is these things are being driven by AI with people checking in to make sure that they're doing things in the right way or get some form of approval process. We're going to pick just two of these areas to dig into. The first one is drafting a job description for a new board member, and the second one we'll look at is a tailored onboarding plan. So we'll go to ChatGPT. What can I help you with? And we'll type in craft a job description of a board member for a UK-based public company. So what I did was I actually had ChatGPT act as if it was a professor at MIT running a prompting course and evaluate this prompt and give it a grade. It came back and it gave it a C+. And based on what we had just talked about, the reasons for that are probably obvious. I didn't tell it the role that I wanted it to play. I didn't provide it with enough context, and I didn't really specify a style and format. So how could we do it better? First, tell it what the role is. You're an expert in corporate governance and executive recruitment. Secondly, I need your help creating a job description for a new board member for our UK-based corporation. And the UK may have different formats and structures than it would in the US or somewhere else. And then there's a lot of context. So this context doesn't need to be what you put in. It's just a sample of more background for this to work with. And this could be text. It could be a document that you attach. It could be a website that you point it to. So we'll go through it quickly. What's the role of the board? What are the key challenges? What's the desired candidate profile? Additional information. And I also put in a website. And in this case, it's for Burberry. So in this case, I simply just put in the website. I could have gone to some more detailed pages. I could have like collected more information, but for the sake of this exercise, this is what I wanted to try. So we're going to pop over now to ChatGPT so you can actually see what this would look like real time running this. All right, this should look familiar by now. I'm going to take that prompt, and to save you the pain of watching me type it, I just pasted that whole prompt in that we just saw on the screen. Then I'm going to hit go. And as you'll see, you saw how quickly that comes back. And this is now giving me, it says here's a professional job description. And what's interesting in this is they came back and they're already starting to format it for us. Gives us the key responsibilities. And we can go back and look at these, but what you'll see in some of these is actually pulling information off the URL and things that we didn't tell it. So for example, there was reference above to the expansion in Europe. Here it's talking to some of its ESG work, referring to things that are UK based that just went by. So let's go through and take a look at this. So sets it up as if it looks like a board description, gives us an about Burberry section, the overview of the role. And what you may see is in some of these areas, it may have added to responsibilities that we didn't actually have in there. And I look at this as a benefit, but this is also one of those reasons why you always want to check to see what it comes up with. Now, the benefit I see on this is even if we didn't put something in there about ESG, and we may have, but I don't think we did, but it will find these things and add them to the job description because that is what it has seen in other similar job descriptions. So in some ways you're like, oh, that's right, maybe we should have that in. But it also means that there are times that you might not want it in, so you should always go back and scrub this stuff pretty carefully. And one of the things that we should check is to please review for any bias or non-inclusive language. It gives us some areas to suggest. Consider ensuring that the listed expertise areas do not intentionally exclude candidates with transferable skills. So we could choose in this to apply it or not. So it's basically gone through and looked for anything that might restrict people or be sexist or offensive. And again here, it calls that out. It says this is strong, but you could explicitly mention welcoming candidates from underrepresented groups. Let's say, okay, let's take that. And what you'll see is that we'll actually come in here and make that change, which is just done. So then we can go through the rest of it, and it actually looks pretty good. So that's just to show you, we could continue going through, interrogating it, asking it questions, asking it to check on things, adding more here and less there, and it will go through and update it real time. One of the things we're seeing here is this is a slightly different interface than what I saw last week when I was on, which in some ways is a little disconcerting, but it also just shows that OpenAI and the other companies are constantly updating these models. So you may see some things that are a little bit different, but in almost all cases, those are improvements, and that's just the nature of where these models are. So anyways, back to the presentation. Okay, we've done that. Let's move on to a tailored onboarding plan. So some interesting stats on onboarding, right? And these are just corporate overall, but you can extrapolate from this to figure out how important onboarding is for board, which you already know. So basically, an effective onboarding process boosts retention rates of new hires by 82%. Yet, only 5% of organizations have a continuous onboarding process in place. So probably not a surprise to anybody who's been in the corporate world or the board world for a while, but it does underscore the importance of getting this right. So in this case, we're going to look at a prompt which basically says, help me create an onboarding guide for a new board member. Ask me the information or questions you need to create a personalized onboarding guide. So really simple. But what I like about this is rather than you telling it what you need, in this case, if I don't know where to get started with an onboarding guide, I can simply ask these models, help me out here, right? Act as an expert who's done this before and ask me the questions that will allow you to go off and create an onboarding guide. And it can do this because with the way the models work, they've ingested and studied thousands and thousands of onboarding guides and onboarding best practices. And it's assimilating that to come back to say, based on everything that I know about you, or which I'll learn from asking you these questions, I can then go and create a standard onboarding guide. So with all of these things, and I should have mentioned this before, the key thing is you never want to take the output from one of these models, whether it's for an email or for an onboarding guide or a job description, as the final product. What I find is I can usually get to about 75 or 80% of the final product through these tools. But you always want to go back and check it and confirm that it's accurate, and also make sure it doesn't sound like AI. Because when you're first getting started, you'll probably be getting back some responses that sound kind of mechanical, or you'll be able to say, I think that was done with AI. So you really want to avoid that. So in every case, go back, read it, change it, make it your own, make sure it's in your style and tone. And there are some ways that you can use AI to mimic your style and tone, which is for another session. So you can get there, but I'm talking about when you're first starting off, just be really careful to reread and confirm everything. So with that, let me stop here again, and we'll pop over to ChatGPT and take a look at that. So here we've opened it up, and what you'll see is it says, help me create an onboarding guide for a new board member. Ask me the information that you need to create a personalized onboarding guide. And it comes back and it says, creating a personalized onboarding guide for a new board member requires a thorough understanding of the organization, blah, blah, blah. It comes back and asks me a series of questions about the organization, mission and vision, history, key programs and services, strategic goals, board composition, role of the new board member, governance and operations. So it goes on and on. There's quite a bit of information here. So what you could do is you could either answer these, you could point it to your website where you might have a description of your objectives or your mission or your vision. You could upload documents. In some cases, you could upload something from a proposal that you may have given, which would include background on your mission and vision in there. So you don't need to redo all of this. You can point to other materials where you have it or you have part of it and ask it to pick it up and go from there. So essentially what I did here was I went through and I just, rather than recreate it, I asked the model to generate this for a nonprofit. And that's less important than we get to. Then, after I fed it back with that context, I said, create a warm, welcoming board of directors onboarding guide customized for a 35-year-old woman, Ann McAllister, who is currently head of Wyndham Hotel Group in the US. So what's important about that is I didn't just give it information about the nonprofit. I gave it information about the person who was coming in, which allowed it to customize the onboarding guide specifically to that person. So what you'll see here is it went through and it said, we're thrilled to have you join us to explore, and this is the name of the group that I put together. As a distinguished leader in the travel and hospitality industry and currently head of the Wyndham Group, your wealth of experience. So it refers to that and puts it in some context, which is actually pretty relevant, and it sounds pretty good. And then it comes back and it created an initial background on the group, mission and vision, the story, key offerings, your role on the board, right? What we value about you, right? So this is pretty interesting too. So it pulled that out based on what it would have assumed her role at the Wyndham Group would have been and where it's relevant. Focus areas, the mentorship program that they have. And again, it put in our chairperson, Sarah Ellington, and who knows where it got Sarah Ellington, which is why I use this as a good guide. It's like, okay, you could replace Sarah with whoever your chairperson is. So that's a good example where you might say it's hallucinating, but in some ways that hallucination allows me to try to figure out, the best way to edit this and reframe it. Board structure and operations, board composition, committees, getting to know you or getting to know the group, your impact, key relationships, success stories, and then sort of the board's commitment to the new board member. So I really like this as a framework to say, if you needed to create an onboarding guide and you needed to do it relatively quickly, this would be a great outline. And it's probably more than an outline. You could probably take, again, I would say maybe 75% of it. You obviously update it with your specific people. And had we uploaded the right context information, this information here would have been accurate. Those are the two examples we did. And then for the actual presentation, we broke the team up into groups of 3, where each group picked one out of the 10 steps in the onboarding process and dug into it with real world examples. And as you're going forward thinking about these tools and how you get involved with them, I would suggest either formally or informally pulling together a group of people who are at a similar stage to you, or maybe a little above, a little behind, but have a slightly different perspective, and you can work with them on a regular basis to bring examples, to bounce ideas off of, learning from one another, because really that's how you're going to do this. The one thing I want to say is, if you enjoyed this, the really fun part of these sessions is when you get to do it with other people. When you break out into small groups, either in the breakout rooms on Zoom or in person, that is where the real learning and connection happens. So with that, if you did find this interesting, and if you do want to go deeper, we've got a really fun, interesting, engaging AI fundamentals course where you get to go through all of these things in a lot more detail and leave with some really hands-on practical knowledge. We also have the strategic side of things, where if you're grappling with how to do this across an organization, what steps do you take to roll it out, we've got that covered as well. So you've got a couple ways to reach us. One is our emails are over here, and the QR code here will put you on our mailing list. So I would love to stay in touch. Also reach out on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there, which is also another way to see what Doug and I are doing. I'm posting every couple days with interesting prompts, different ways of using it, different perspectives. So we're easy to reach. So we would love to stay in touch. And again, many thanks to the Praxonomy team. Really, really enjoyed working with you and hope to do it in the future. So thank you. Look forward to staying in touch.